In what has been the longest hiatus of Ariana Grande's career, Positions has been an album that I have formed quite an attachment to. It is a very special album and era to me. It ignites a certain warm nostalgia for me that I can't quite explain. I'm just so in love with it. I honestly think I held on to Positions more so because I knew it would be the last time we'd get music from Ariana for a while. That album felt very final, very much like a conclusion. Fitting because to me it was the final album in the 3-album arc that started with Sweetener and continued with Thank You Next. Yours truly, My Everything and Dangerous Woman formed the first arc of Ariana's story to me, while Sweetener, Thank You Next, and Positions formed the second arc. With Eternal Sunshine, we begin the third arc of the ever-evolving story of Ariana Grande. I intentionally stayed away from any and all discussion of this album prior to its release because I wanted to go into this as blindly as possible. Like I said, the last 4 years have been the longest gap between Ariana Grande releases in history, so this one felt extra special, a far bigger deal than any Ariana record prior to it. I genuinely did not know what to expect going into Eternal Sunshine, but to put it concisely, it has been a very long time since an album has genuinely left me speechless. About 3 tracks in, I was in actual tears at how phenomenal this album is. Eternal Sunshine is by far Ariana Grande's most cohesive record to date. Ariana truly gave me exactly what I wanted from her. This album is absolutely dripping in that R&B flavor that I always wanted from her. The best way I can describe this album's sound is the love child of Sweetener and Positions. What stands out to me the most about this record is the production and songwriting. Everything on this album flows so seamlessly. Eternal Sunshine isn't an album with a beginning, middle, and end, honestly. The entire thing is just one long experience, a 35-minute vibe. And yes, it's rather short, but I genuinely enjoyed the album as a whole so much that the length didn't really bother me. The songwriting here is by far Ariana's most mature, most refined, and most honest. The same maturity that she exhibited on Positions by exerting her womanhood and sexuality is replaced by something more conservative here, far more introspective, but just as firm. There's a very carefully handled balance on Eternal Sunshine. One thing about Ariana Grande is she has mastered the art of hiding pain in plain sight. There's a very clear theme of pain and loss of love on this record, given what she's gone through since Positions. But what makes this album so special is the way she balances that pain with rediscovering herself and establishing a sense of gratitude and self-assurance. Eternal Sunshine and Thank You Next both came after very public losses for Ariana, but what's so fascinating to me is how she handles the aftermath of both situations very differently on these 2 albums. Thank You Next embraced the ugly side of the healing and dealing with pain and heartache. It sort of wallowed in it for a bit at times, while handling it like most young adults would, by hiding behind bravado and bad decisions. The way Eternal Sunshine handles that same subject matter is far more mature and well thought out. Remember, this is post-Positions era Ariana Grande that we're dealing with. She has been healed and knows herself far better than Thank You Next Ariana did. Eternal Sunshine acknowledges the sadness and pain, but doesn't let it define the record like Thank You Next does. A fitting metaphor of how once someone learns how to deal with these emotions, they learn to not let them define them as a person. They learn to accept that it's a part of life, learn from it, move on, and apply it moving forward. Eternal Sunshine handles negative emotions in the most beautiful way imaginable. There's acknowledgement of the pain of her divorce, acknowledgement of guilt and everything that comes with it, but she carries the pain of that very differently. She accepted it and moved on. What Eternal Sunshine has in common with its 3 older sibling albums, however, is the common theme of unconditional gratitude. It has been ever present in her material since Sweetener. Gratitude for life, gratitude for loved ones, gratitude for love itself, gratitude for ex-lovers, gratitude for her career, and even gratitude for the pain she's endured, because it all feeds into making her a better person. And I think that's ultimately what makes Ariana's music so special to not only me, but so many others. Despite all of the nonsense and truly traumatic things she's had to endure in the public eye, nonetheless, she's never stopped showing gratitude for everything. She has always been grateful for even the bad things because they afforded her opportunities to learn and grow as a person. Eternal Sunshine at its core balances 4 themes: loss of love, acceptance, self-assurance, and gratitude. The album starts with a question: how do you know you're in the right relationship? A valid question, one we have all had. The intro, subtitled End of the World, is a brief ponderance of that question. Ariana has had a very public romantic roller coaster, one that gets increasingly unpredictable as time goes on, and with so many relationships in her rearview mirror, it's understandable to have that question. If the world were to end, she's wondering if her current lover would want to spend it with her. It's a hyperbolic way of seeing if the lover she's with is truly the right one. Track 2 is the wonderfully uptempo song titled Bye, which starts the theme of the album in earnest. The lyrics talk about the end of a relationship, but embracing the courage it takes to leave, facing one's fears and taking that step. Perhaps the answer to the previous question was a no. Bye highlights that not often talked about feeling of freedom after leaving a situation that has obviously run its course, and the peppy production drives that feeling of liberation home before seamlessly transitioning to Don't Want to Break Up Again, which slows things down just a bit. If the previous song was talking about the liberation of leaving a relationship, then this one represents those inevitable second thoughts that hit you in the car as you drive away from their house for the last time, or while you lay in bed for the first time alone after the fact. Ultimately, the song still accepts that what has happened and it was very necessary, but the regret is still there. The questions are still rolling around in her head. Specifically for someone who has been through more than a few breakups, Ariana surely has grown tired of the process. She's tired of relationships ending. One might get used to the motions of doing so, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. The Saturn Returns interlude highlights the finding of oneself, a shift in the universe, a shift in one's way of thinking. It represents that moment when you wake up and start realizing everything, and it all starts falling into place. For context, a Saturn return happens approximately every 29 and a half years, returning to its exact placement as it was on one's birthday roughly 29 years prior. It means that you are shedding parts of yourself to grow into a full adult and become a more mature version of yourself. There are multiple different experiences that happen while in your Saturn return, and there are numerous lessons learned. And it's in this moment right here that we see just how Eternal Sunshine is elevated beyond everything that came before it. This interlude calls back to the intro of In My Head from Thank You Next, both of which kind of act like an awakening of sorts for Ariana. A key difference, though, is that the realization comes far earlier on Eternal Sunshine than it does on Thank You Next, the former coming at track 4 as opposed to track 9 on the latter. And right on cue, we arrive at the album's title track, a dreamy reflection, a lullaby of realization and acceptance that could only come from Ariana. Eternal Sunshine is a beautifully raw song, very honest, and its lyrics are wince-inducing at times, but the heavenly production softens the blow. There's ugly truths here, acknowledgments of fault on both sides, and even admission of her falling into old coping habits when it comes to relationships. Despite all of this ugliness, she still calls her ex-lover her Eternal Sunshine, in a deeper reference to the movie of the same name that I won't go into right here. But for the sake of brevity, by calling her ex-lover her Eternal Sunshine, Ariana embraces her past relationship and the lessons that she learned from it, instead of trying to erase them. The theme of gratitude that I brought up earlier is here in full play. The title track reflects on the end of the relationship just like Don't Want to Break Up Again does. However, here she's being honest with herself and her ex-lover. She's looking back on it with acceptance rather than regret. Supernatural lightens things up a bit, bringing us to the surface with a song that's far more familiar territory for Ariana when talking about the subject matter. A song about love that is so strong and all-consuming that she wonders if it's from somewhere beyond our plane of existence. Fittingly, the song's production sounds very much out of this world, one of Ariana's most unique sounding tracks by far. True Story has very similar wavy mid-tempo R&B production to its predecessor, addressing the numerous rumors that have plagued the tabloids about Ariana during the last year or so. She's offering to play the part of the villain that the public is trying to paint her as. She's playing with the idea of becoming the bad girl everyone sees her as, being the girl that everyone loves to hate. True Story essentially sets up the next track, The Boy Is Mine, which has Ariana accepting the bad girl role. The song is a risque yet cleverly executed way of playing into the nonsense homewrecker allegations that have been thrown around. In addition to being a love letter to mid-2000s R&B, the song also acts as a spiritual successor to Ariana's viral leaked song Fantasize, which caught a lot of positive reception. Track 9 is the lead single, the thumping house anthem Yes and the song works even better in the context of the album when looking at the subject matter. It continues the theme of addressing the public and tabloids that started with True Story, although Yes and is far more direct in its lyrics. The message is very clear. This song is actually the most outstanding on the record. Its production really doesn't mesh with anything else on the album, honestly, but that's not a bad thing at all to me. It's a brief moment of separation and carelessness, something that could be equated to an out-of-body experience, almost as if Ariana had to break the flow of the record in order to get some things off her chest. The album's second single, We Can't Be Friends, follows and brings us back to business, embracing the blissful ignorance that comes with troubled relationships. This is one of my personal favorite kinds of pop songs, ones that make you want to dance and cry at the same time. Mixed in with the somberness and doubt that is all throughout this Europop-infused song is a sense of hope, that same feeling that one would perhaps get after a failed relationship, that often futile thought that maybe things could work out later on in life. As we approach the end of the album, I Wish I Hated You brings things to a near halt, exploring the polarizing array of emotions that comes with the end of a love affair. Love is exhausting, and ending it with someone you love is a very confusing experience. You're learning to live without that person, detaching yourself from them. The truth is, it would be a lot easier if you just hated that person instead of loving them so much. It would make leaving them behind so much easier. The penultimate track on the album, Imperfect for You, calls back to the final track on Positions, POV, as both songs tackled essentially the same subject matter, embracing imperfections in relationships and making the best out of them. And not one to end an album on a somber note, Ordinary Things closes Eternal Sunshine by driving home the aforementioned theme of gratitude. Ariana laments on the necessity of finding happiness and appreciation in the ordinary and mundane day-to-day things, because what's most important is enjoying them with those that you love. And in a creative decision reminiscent of SZA's 2017 album Control, the song wraps up with a voice note from Ariana's grandmother. The original intent of this video was to format it as a typical review, but before I was even a quarter of the way through my first listen, I knew it would be pointless to do it that way. I knew immediately that every song would get 5 stars and that the album would be a 10 out of 10 for me. But I really wanted to approach this in a way that discussed its importance in the context of Ariana's life and career, especially considering how her previous 3 albums have had such a prominent narrative thread connecting them all. Eternal Sunshine is an album that came at the perfect time for me personally, given that I'm just a few months removed from a breakup myself, so perhaps that's why the record resonated with me so heavily. But ultimately why I connect with Ariana's music so heavily is simply because she is a person who has had a very complicated relationship with love. She falls in love quickly, intensely, and unconditionally, but so many times love has left her hurt and at a loss. Despite that, she has never turned her back on it. She's never given up on love, and she has never let her pain and heartbreak sour her outlook on life, and I think that's such a beautiful sentiment. Eternal Sunshine, despite it being based on the end of a marriage for the most part, is ultimately an album that comes from a healed place. I can honestly say that I haven't fallen in love and resonated with the body of work this quickly and this severely in a very, very long time. Eternal Sunshine truly is everything I could have ever wanted from Ariana, a natural successor to everything that came before it, and objectively one of her highest quality releases by far. And I'm not alone in that sentiment. Critics have been overwhelmingly positive towards this record, which is so great to see. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend that you do.